Okay, welcome to part 2 of Bridge in the Woods. This time I'm going to be doing this composition in a moonlit scenario using cool tones instead of the kind of the warmer blues and greens that were used in the previous composition. Alright, so we're laying down a base layer of a warm-toned dye-based ink and following it up with blue tones. Just adding in that warm tone base gives the blue, predominantly blue, cool color scheme just a little bit more of a visual richness. You won't be able to see too much of these warm tone base layers underneath all these cool tones laid on top. But if you were to compare the two next to each other in terms of a final result, one using that warm base layer and ones without, I think you'll be able to kind of see a little bit of the difference. You'll be able to sense it, from a visual sense. It's just a little bit more of a, kind of a more complex temperature scheme when you do it that way. Kind of an old oil painting kind of technique or trick. Okay, so I'm going into this now with a Caribbean blue. It's kind of a mid-tone blue and a pretty important one in terms of establishing a really bright, rich blue color scheme. When you're going monochromatic, things can get a little bit, kind of dull and uninteresting, so it's important to, lay down as many, kind of layers as you need to get a good established deep saturation with whatever your inks that you're using or whatever media that you'll be using. So this is a semi-gloss cardstock, so that type of cardstock will accept colored pencils as well as things like alcohol inks, as well as the dye-based inks being applied here, so I'll use them all. Okay, moving it through some darker blues and going all the way to black right here to really establish those shadows. I'm applying all of this just with a wadded up paper towel, which is good for large areas of coverage, but not great for kind of the more detailed areas. So that's where things like these alcohol markers really come in handy. There's a lot of different blue tones out there, or just an entire value range of every type of hue out there. So these are really great to use in this type of situation, going into kind of more narrow tree trunks, blending colors, etc. Going into my shadow areas like I am now in those background trees, some shadow areas down there in the grassy, meadow area next to the road. But I can get into these really small areas with these pens. Now this is semi-gloss cardstock, so you can't blend them really well on here, but you can blend them enough. Okay, colored pencils. A really great medium to use on the semi-gloss cardstock. A matte cardstock would be more ideal for colored pencils, but it's a good compromise. The semi-gloss cardstock really retains a lot of the inks, the wet media that you apply on the surface, but it has enough tooth that you can build up a pretty good amount of layering with something like colored pencils, or you can even probably apply some types of, maybe pan pastels or something like that, chalks to this type of surface. Okay, not ideal for those again, but you can apply some. Moving in through the black colored pencil here, really establishing some shadows. So, you see, at this point in time, you really can't see too much of that warm-toned base layer that I put down, but when you look around, you can see some of those warm tones kind of showing through some of those areas of the dye-based inks. Going in now, bringing out the sparkle and detailing aspect of this scene with acrylic paint pens. These are really great because they're pretty close to opaque in some situations. They do dry a little bit darker because, they just kind of move towards transparency a little bit more than when freshly applied. But They're really great for highlighting and I guess coloring too. I use it mostly for highlighting and for developing details where all that type of color application with the inks and alcohol inks, colored pencil, etc., it can get things a little bit muddled. Okay, so we get the richness of color depth, but we get a little bit of muddling with kind of the definition of form. So this is able to, the pens here can go back in and really define some areas really nicely. And it kind of brings light into areas that are dark or darker than these pens because they are, you know, more opaque. So you can add light over dark. Okay, defining some of these trees, bringing them out from the background just with a little bit of highlight on certain sides of the tree facing the light source. Sometimes it's a line, sometimes it's, I don't know, 2 or 3 dots to just bring out an object from the background. And this pen right here is a light blue pen. It's using highlights of the color scheme that I'm representing here, which are cool tones under the moonlight. And then following up with white here. And the white is going to create the most amount of contrast, so it's going to stand out the most, but it really adds those final touches to this piece in terms of kind of adding a crisp element and light element to this scene. And then things get a little bit busy when you start adding all these dots in here. Things tend to look like they're crawling with lights at times, because, you know, it's easy to kind of go overboard because these are really fun to add into a scene. So I'll mellow all of that out with some white pigment ink at the end. So we're kind of adding in a really good crisp definitions and light into the scene in the form of highlights here. And then we'll diffuse it all with some kind of more mellow applications. You can see these little dots bringing out that fence down below where it's kind of otherwise in the darkness. And here comes the white pigment ink to just kind of mellow things out a little bit and to add kind of an overall soft light into the scene, which looks really good under a moonlit scenario here. You know, you have that soft, really soft lighting from the moon. And then you can add that in the form of reflected light, you know, the fog throughout the scene. And that's pretty much it. This is really adding in the great final touches here, and it creates additional depth and lighting and just kind of a softness of form. It makes it really inviting from a visual standpoint to have something soft within a scene. Okay, hope you enjoyed the scene. I'll have part 3 of this scene coming up next. I'll do a sunset scene with some fall tones, I think. Thanks for watching. If you like these videos, hope you hit the like button and subscribe.